Hello, welcome to Curry Girl Tech Talk. I am Krystal Curry. Thank you for joining us. Today is episode 5 of our 6-part series about artificial intelligence. This is an exciting era for computer science. If you have been following this podcast series, we have shared what I hope has been helpful business insights, specifically from an artificial intelligence perspective. Today, I am taking on the challenge of discussing the complexities that artificial intelligence presents. I strive to be as authentic as possible and also offer a variety of perspective. And I honestly could not complete this AI series without giving voice to the concerns. Joining today is a female perspective as we talk about the risks, concerns, complexities, and the importance of the governance of artificial intelligence. I am talking tech today with Dr. Sirisha Kuchimanchi. All right, thank you for joining as we try to give voice to this challenging subject matter. Let's jump right into the ethical challenges as far as protecting personal data. Some AI practitioners are using data without the creator's knowledge, consent, or fair compensation for their assets. Many companies are now acknowledging that fact. In our meeting, one of the things you were describing to me is that AI scrapes the internet and takes data irrespective of who the content itself. And there's no real sort of classification at this point on if it's private data, if it's personal data. It just takes the data and synthesizes it from that point. And now we know many companies are acknowledging that fact. What types of other challenges are you seeing that AI brings into view from your corporate role?
So if you look at data or content or IP, right, that is always the thing that differentiates companies or people who might be creators. Mm-hmm. Even your podcast has IP in it.
That's right.
So you don't want someone to scrape it and use your content to do something else with it. So from two perspectives, from a creator's perspective, because I used to host a podcast as well, or for an author, I think, authors like John Grisham and many authors have been concerned that AI is going to scrape and write a book using their voices, their ideas. By the way, I did use AI to start writing just to see how it generates a novel. So I gave it a prompt and wanted to see how it did. And I started to read it. I just gave it a prompt to see what it does. And it can do it because it has all this knowledge base. On the same way, if you look at corporate, there is a concern that I think Samsung a few months ago ran into this, right? There is a challenge in how much data you put into it and how the data is used. So obviously corporates are going to create their own internal AI engines that they will build and that they will own, because you cannot put it into the web to do. Right. Like ChatGPT for a pro version gives you the opportunity to create your own GPT, right? You can create it in your voice for yourself and have it such a way that it doesn't share the data. And the hope and the intent is probably hoping it's to the letter where it actually does not do that, because what you say and what you do might not always do, because Google with incognito said it was incognito but was scraping data and ran into trouble till they had to compensate and go back on it. So I have GPT that generates things for me based on what I write into it for me to generate content for myself. So I know that ChatGPT definitely has it in the pro version. Maybe the others have it. I've not tried it. At least a few months ago when I used Claude, it didn't. It might have it because they're constantly updating. So you can create your own GPT. You can create more than one GPT because you might have different profiles. I have one probably for content, one for tech, one for all the different aspects of things I do. That it might have my CV, it might have episodes I've done, thoughts I have written, and then it generates based on, I don't have to always give it a prompt saying, this is my background and restart it. So those GPTs exist and I use them for some things and I use general AI for some things because I don't want that to go back. So every time there are those categories and I click on those and, they're like private, you don't share them. You can also share them with somebody, maybe a team member. So there's different ways to play it.
Oh, that's awesome. That sounds to me like a solution, because that definitely sounds like a way to own your own data and to have it be specific to you. And then you're not worried about all these other things that come into play as far as a creator is concerned. You can protect your own content that way. But I do want to talk about the risk and what kind of governance practices we have because I know that project we were working on, one of the things that we did is we had a data governance team, and that data governance team, their job and part of what my concern in leading that team is to make sure that we classify the data correctly, that the data is stored in a secure manner and accessed by the proper permissions and all that type of thing. And we had separate policies that govern the way that we implement certain projects and the way that data is distributed. From an AI perspective, what kind of governance practices can we put in place to ensure that private data or our own data is secure?
That's an open-ended question. The hackers will probably figure it out before we finish formulating our thoughts. But I mean, we need guardrails. There is no doubt about it. The question is, are the guardrails going to come in time for AI? Is like this runaway train. It's left the station. It's out there. There's no way to catch it. It's too far out. The question is, what can you put around it? I mean, there's the politics of it, and then there's the technology part of it, right? Because there's government and big corps and lobbying. That's one side. But as an individual, what you can do, I mean, you can try, but we all find out information after the fact. But governance it's like any other data, right? You need rights to access, data retention, traceability. You're doing what you say you're doing, and you're following the letter of, if someone has actually read that 3-page agreement before they say, I agree, privacy, that it actually says it. So there are things like that we need, and somebody needs to enforce them. On a completely different note, but I think this draws a good parallel. One of the Scandinavian countries a few years ago, I don't remember which one, because, with social media, sometimes inappropriate images are shared. And I think there was these teenage kids in a school that had shared their classmates. I think it was kind of like cyberbullying. They're one of the Scandinavian countries that actually prosecuted the children because I think they wanted to showcase that you are liable for what you do. I mean, as much as we talk about law and jurisdiction, unless those things are done a certain way, people are not going to take seriously.
That's right.
And so there's a fine balance on how things work, but people need to understand because there is hesitancy around AI, right? There is a huge opportunity and all of that, but there is hesitancy, there is risk in it. It's going to change people's job profiles. I mean, there's a lot of things that are going to come out that we don't know yet. No one knows the answers, and we're going to have to figure out as we do. But if people can work quickly and agree, because there are national bodies, just like they have the rules for EU has strict guidelines on, access and privacy. So we need global governance as well, because all this is cross-border traffic as it goes.
Yeah, one of the resources that you pointed to was AI for Good. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So AI for Good is a theme. There's a lot of AI for Good forums. The UN has AI for Good conferences, which are based on their SDG, their sustainability goals. I think there are maybe it's 17. I don't remember the exact number. It could be poverty, it could be economic development, it's sustainability, technology. They're like these SDG goals the UN did a few years ago that is used. So there's AI for Good conferences. There's one coming up, I think, pretty soon, and there's some next year. But that is being used as a theme for a lot of things. Because if you look at AI is a technology thing. AI existed in various forums if you talk to people, right? People have been working on it. The thing it did was ChatGPT made it more sort of democratized in a way that many people can access it now and use it. So it's given access. But how the challenge with it is the technology and understanding of the technology behind it is owned by the technologists. But AI for Good can be used by creative people or people from social sectors in a way that could enable their progress. But they may not be technologically savvy. So anywhere that intersection can be done, I think then starts to have a global impact for good in so many different ways. Because, urbanization, the world's changing, not just for AI, just generally as, we all progress, the world changes. How do we enable and keep opportunity and equity growing for all of these people?
Yeah, absolutely. Because one of the things that we learned from OpenAI is that 80% of the workforce could have at least 10% of their work tasks affected. And then they said the other 19% could see at least 50% of their tasks impacted. And they're projecting that it spans all wage levels, with higher income jobs facing the greater exposure due to the LLM capabilities. And then they said 15% of all worker tasks in the US could be completed significantly faster at the same level of quality. And that's a huge economic impact to people, because if we're getting all of this work done more efficiently, then of course that means that less people are needed to do all of this work. And in some ways that's good, because maybe it frees up opportunities in other areas for people to move into. But economically, one of the things that I think they're doing is implementing this standardized income. Like, they're testing that in different parts of the country where there's just a standard level of income that everybody gets. You just get that regardless. And I think they're doing that as a risk mitigation strategy for people that they project their jobs are going to be impacted due to this oncoming train of artificial intelligence, with all the things that are happening. Before we put the guardrails on it, I think they're trying to get ahead of it in some ways by saying, hey, we're going to give at least everybody $500 a month or something like that, as a way to have income to get ahead of whatever economic impacts may happen. But that's just one perspective. I'm not even sure if that's actually what they're doing. I have read the stories of the standardized income being tested in pockets across the United States. But I just wonder how we get ahead of, some of these things. There are things personally that we can do, but I wonder from an entire global impact, I feel overwhelmed a little with the possibility of people out of jobs due to the efficiencies that will be gained because of artificial intelligence.
There's so much to unwrap in this, so I'll go through in different stages. In some ways, this is like the Industrial Revolution, which impacted blue-collar workers, right? Mm-hmm. When they got off the floor and robotics and automation took over, there was a huge impact to their job profiles and what they could do. This is going to affect the white-collar market now. That's what's going to happen. And from your survey, what you said, it's going to affect in different ways. The jobs we did, I think there's a differentiating between jobs and skills. Some of the skills in our jobs will still be there, but some of the skills will transform. So that's how the job profile will change. Will your job be there? Will it be completely eliminated? That I do not know. There can be a gradation depending on the type of job. But there'll be parts of every job probably that will see some transformation. I think we met at the same conference, and I think one of the company senior VPs at one of the big companies, tech companies, was saying, I think it was solution architect or something, how fast in minutes, and I saw a recent article as well, in minutes that it can write the code, verify it, and deploy it, which takes weeks for someone to do it, and fairly accurately. The advantage that AI has is it takes away a lot of mundane stuff. The question is it going to keep enough of the thinking and creating stuff out there for people to do? There is that balance to do that.
Because we still need people to validate. I mean, because I used to be a programmer, once we write out the code and we test it and validate it, though AI can do that much faster, we still need people to validate that it's accurate, right? Like, it may have created the code, but it may validate itself that it works according to the instructions that it's been given. But from a human perspective, we still have to put our lens on it to verify that the AI actually got it right?
Exactly. And if you look at any ChatGPT response or Claude or any other thing you use, it always says verify the data, because the data is not accurate, right? There's hallucinations, it's pulling stuff from somewhere, it's drawing certain conclusions. And AI, if you ask it a question about something you did, it'll always tell you did a great job. It's never going to tell you that was horrible or it was terrible. You always get a incredibly positive, flowery language, response. And so that is always the thing. So you have to validate it. And there's opportunity to take away some of the drudgery out of it and do. And I mean, we're talking about different segments of population, right? When you're talking about white collar jobs or people who work in tech and doing that kind of jobs, they're going to have to understand and reskill and see. There's going to be a lot of prompt engineers, a different kind of profile of jobs that are going to show up. That's one part of it. Then when we talk about underrepresented, underserved communities who may not be accessing STEM, we have to talk about how are we upskilling. I mean, just generally population, how are we upskilling population? How are we reskilling population? What does that look like? That is a huge opportunity for a lot of people to step into. And there is a gap that needs to be filled. Corporates have to do it, community organizations, governments, everyone needs to step in, and everyone is working on these agenda. I mean, everyone's aware of it. The question is, how do you navigate the space is the part that people are trying to work out in. Every time something like this happens, something incredibly disruptive, some doors open and some doors close as technology changes. So it's trying to figure that out and asking questions. I think the thing for anybody to do, no matter whether it's AI or anything you want to do, is ask people questions. Listen to a podcast like this or other places. Get your information. The challenge now is, I tell my kids this, when I was growing up, there was a dearth of information or access to information. Now the challenge is not that. You have so much. The question is which is accurate, which is true, and how much can you process? You cannot process all of this. I mean, you can probably put the document into ChatGPT and ask it to summarize and read it and then verify it. Sometimes that's what we do. If I have large docs, I'll put it in, let it, and then if it's of interest, then I go back and reread the whole thing because we can't process so much information.
That's right.
Sometimes. So that is how we would have to balance and figure out the nuances of what we're going to do.
All right. One of the things I was thinking when you talked about that, we're all aware of it now, we're working on it, actively working on it. But do you think, or do you agree that the government legislation should help guide us? Because I am of the thought process that though we want the government regulations, and they have been involved from a technology for long periods of time. I mean, we have, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act and the Communications Decency Act. I mean, we have all these government legislative sort of procedures and policies in place to help guide us to make sure that we do this. Do you agree that the government should have some sort of role in helping us to make our way through this AI thing? Because I think we often look to them to do that, but are we looking in the right place? We've always looked to them, from my perspective, to guide us. We've had all these different things that are in place that guide corporations. And, we want them to have some, from my opinion, I think we want them to have some level of involvement, but not to the point that it stifles the enterprise or stifles the growth. But we do want it to be, place where people feel safe, secure, and that everybody is given access.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you want innovation to thrive. You want technology to move. It has to move. But you want... It's a fine balance, right? Who else is going to do it if not the government? There is no entity that oversees everything, whether it's each country's national government or a global organization. Because a corporate, no matter whether it's a small company or a big tech or whoever it is, you cannot have the fox guard the hen house. It cannot self, like you said, you cannot check the code yourself. We are all... Even as a human, it's not just a corporate. We are all generally inherently biased.
Right.
Or we only know this. So we are going to drive the data or analyze it with our lens, right? It's just unconscious bias that exists no matter what you do. So you need something else to oversee it and look at it and provide some guidance. And also someone who understands the impact and the thing, but is able to provide a more global perspective. It's not... your perspective or one specific way that you're looking at it. I mean, when you're talking about government, you're not talking about just politicians. These government, I heard a young lady speak who was a technical fellow in the government. These are all technologists who work in the government, crafting these policies with senators or House representatives. So there are technologists behind this that write it, have been working on it actively. So they are coming from that incredibly educated perspective that are drawing up these guidelines. on how to look at it. And because they have to look at it not just as a technology, they have to look at economic impact. They have to look at so much, right? Social justice, everything. They have to balance all these pieces because all of it comes together to run a country of people.
Absolutely. And I wondered if there are any, like, for any of these creators that feel like their rights have been infringed on, or they feel like AI has taken advantage of some intellectual property that they have. Are there any mechanisms in place currently, like a dispute mechanism? What can they use besides, I mean, I guess obviously the legal system?
I'm not aware of it. And I'm going to sound flippant when I say this, but I'd say maybe type it into AI and ask them who to use to go and ask for a course. I do not know. But I'm sure there are organizations, maybe, see who's drafting the policy. Who are the organizations behind it and ask them. Like for social justice, you'd go to like NAACP. Like that, there must be organizations that are crafting this. Find who they are. See who is doing UN AI for good, and maybe you find someone there, because I don't know how copyright infringement is going to work. That is a whole thing, right? Yeah. There is the part where I said you can create your GPT. That's one thing, but things like this, podcasts, books, everything becomes public. There's copyright that way, but I know that like OpenAI and all have signed deals with, I think, like New York Times, Wall Street, because they have realized that they are going to have pulled masses of data. So a lot of partnerships are being built, and that's probably how it's going to progress going forward. Scarlett Johansson, I think, had, whole OpenAI because one of the voices sounded like her. And so they had to take that off. So there will be things. Interestingly, during the Olympics, there were lots of ads, and if you saw, there was a Google ad on AI and stuff. And then one part of the ad had a young girl writing a fan letter to an athlete. And I think after a few days, they pulled that ad out because that kind of took away the creativity of the young child to write a letter to her sports hero. No one knows how to navigate this. There's the social angle. There's a lot of optics, how people are perceived with social media. So you have to be very careful and nuanced around that. So it's like a bog field. You might slip in one, but there's a lot of places to go and find it and find other creatives. It's like anything you do, you want a support network. Yeah. Another group of people doing similar things or adjacent things that you can talk to and find that information to go ahead.
All right. What are your thoughts or predictions about artificial intelligence tools and GPTs? And, we've given people ways to leverage these tools even as a part of my podcast. Want them to be empowered with ways to leverage these things. And there are segments of the population that aren't as technically savvy and may not know how to use different tools. And we've given them some tools that kind of help them hopefully streamline their own lives or help them get a leg up, whether it's resume writing, to help them with anything. With the emergence of all these tools, I'm just wondering what predictions you see as far as how AI will progress in the future.
Yeah, so I want to address the first part where you said for someone who's new or not, does not know it, right? I used ChatGPT before ChatGPT got fully released because people had told me. I remember using it the first time and thinking, what is this? Because it didn't make any sense to me. Because your prompts are not right. You just type something. Your ability to talk to it comes with practice. And I tell people I use it as a business partner sometimes. It helps me formulate thoughts, process things. It's not that I'm going to execute necessarily on its plan, but it helps to compile a lot of information and give you a way to look at what that looks like. On the flip side, I might already have something and I might put it in it and then let it iterate it and clean it up. Something simple as sending an email to someone. It helps you polish it up, right? Well, you have to think of the words and spend hours on it. It gives you a first draft. You have to clean up what the GPT sends you. And once you put your voice in it, it helps it write it better. But that is an ability that it provides. There are custom GPTs inside ChatGPT that others have that you can use. Logo creators, this, that, all sorts of things. So what does the future hold? It's going to transform economies, jobs. Interestingly, for someone who's doing construction, plumbing, it maybe helps them in certain ways, but their jobs don't go away, right? Because that's a physical, you have to be proximity to it. It's going to change how we communicate. how education is going to be in schools, how a whole new generation is going to change, because the demographics of the world are changing. Different countries have incredibly young populations and different countries have incredibly aging populations. So all of that is going to change. Is AI going to be a companion to some? Just like in Japan, they have those robots and stuff. So I think ChatGPT just recently said, right? One concern is it has a voice, which I haven't used, the voice part of it, and people might get emotionally attached to it. Think about it: if you're isolated, you're introverted, or don't have a social network, and you're talking to it, you might. It's like I said about having a business partner, right? I luckily talk to a lot of other people. Otherwise, I could just have it as my companion talking to it. So it has to be that thing that we have to balance. And I'm going to share this, but not to scare people, but if anyone has ever watched the movie Wall-E, if you've seen it, there is a scene where people are on a conveyor belt and drinking, I think, like big gulp juices. That is an extreme version of it, right? But how do you stay relevant? And how do you find, maybe in some way, maybe what it could do is, people work 60 hours, 80 hours. Maybe it will make our work-life balance better. The question is, will corporates continue to retain those jobs, right? That is the thing that no one knows, because there's still a capitalistic economy that runs. And maybe that, if they allow people to do that, maybe you get to do the more interesting stuff and you don't have to do the Excel sheet stuff and things, and some balance. And I had a friend I met recently who was telling me she works for a big corp and they wanted their employees to get AI ready, but I think it behooves employers also to support their employees, because the way she said it is, the employer gave them access to something and said, go learn this on your own. And I'm like, that doesn't always work, because not everyone can learn it themselves. So there is this balance, and not everyone's going to adopt it the same way. So start learning something. There's YouTube, there's so many resources, and start playing with it. School teachers are going to see kids using it. It's the reality. But I heard a friend made a post recently on LinkedIn. Richard Feynman, one of the greatest physicists, a Nobel laureate, he talks about his father. There's this video. His father talks about some bird and says the bird's name in many languages. He said, all it tells you is the bird's name, but doesn't tell you anything about the bird. So how can you know more about not just using AI, but what does it mean? What is it behind it? I think that becomes important. Unwrapping something to see what value you get out and what value you can provide. That is what matters, because that is what makes you happy and what you contribute. So finding that mix of purpose and intent is where the transformation will come.
That's awesome. It's revolutionary. It's changing our lives globally. The capabilities of AI. I do think it's capable of mind-blowing things, but the GPTs and the artificial intelligence is only going to be as good as what we give it.
Yeah, very true, because there's the ability for us to bring disparate things together. I know AI does, but AI builds it on the models that it already knows exist. It doesn't think of something that isn't in it, right? And the ability for us to ask questions, difficult questions we don't know the answers to. That's kind of what Feynman's thing was. Can we ask the questions? We don't have to know the answers. And AI, I mean, there's different modalities of thought, right? The internet changed it. When internet came by, people thought it was going to completely transform. Yes, it transformed some parts of it, but not everything. Yes, it made knowledge more accessible, remote work, certain parts of it, and built new industries. AI is going to do the same thing, but AI is going to have its own challenges, because there's only so much GPU, there's so much energy consumption that comes out of Gen AI. Technology will hit a roadblock, and how does the compute power come in? There are only a couple of players. So all of this comes into play, because
those are business opportunities too.
Absolutely. So that's what everything transforms in. And maybe the transformation will be as much as we think it is, or maybe not as much as we think it is, right? It's not something, I want to be sure that people are not fearful of it. But say it's going to be the new norm, and just figure out. I mean, to go back, really back, you had running water, you had, sanitation, like different things come when the light bulb came and you had electricity at home. You think suddenly it's going to change everything, but it changes some part of the world, not everything. So how do you adopt it, and how do you use it? Going back to AI for good. Why do you still develop a business? It doesn't have to be that it's only a nonprofit, but bringing people along on the journey, because the world demographics is changing. A lot of Asia and Africa is incredibly young. How do you enable these people to be creative, to contribute? The world population will continue to increase. So there's a lot of things that we can think of, and helping people show, like when you probably showed your grandparents how to use the internet, like showing them how to use AI now, and maybe it'll help them in different ways and not feel so isolated sometimes. I mean, there could be many ways it can be positive, negative. I mean, that's true of everything that comes into the world, whether it's technology or not. And how do you find the best of it?
Yeah, it's that balance. How do we find the best of it? Well, thank you very much for joining the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining today's discussion surrounding the challenging aspects of artificial intelligence. I want to thank Dr. Sirisha Kuchimanchi for joining the podcast. Dr. Kuchimanchi has a podcast of her own. Please listen to her podcast as well. We'll list the ways to connect with her at our website, currygirltechtalk.com. Sometimes when we look at the complex nature of artificial intelligence, problem solving can seem like a daunting task, but solutions begin with a conversation. I hope that today's podcast sparks a conversation so that we can do something to address it. Privacy is foundational to a free society, and we, the people, value the American hallmarks of free speech and privacy. In order for us to thrive and to continue to prosper as we leverage artificial intelligence and other advances in technology, we do need the government to step up and assist. I believe that we have merely scratched the surface of the capabilities of artificial intelligence. Since the introduction of the World Wide Web, which has connected us globally, we looked to governments to help us with regulatory measures, but not to the extent that it encumbers free enterprise. I believe that we need a balance of legislation that is tempered with the spirit of innovation that we dream of. Do not be dismayed. I know that we will rise to this challenge as we always have. That is who we are and will always be as Americans. Check our website at currygirltechtalk.com for more information about AI for good and links to the executive order from the White House and OpenAI's letter. I am Krystal. Take care.